Cool. So I wanted to record a little lecture today. I wanted to record a little lecture about um, basically intellectual frameworks for like models for the universe is essentially what I want to go for. So talking about um, yeah, essentially just the ways that we conceptualize reality. And if you think about it from an evolutionary kind of perspective, um, you have for thousands of years you have religious models of the universe. You have the Abrahamic traditions. You have all cultures have their religious traditions, even going back to earlier tribalism, uh, Paleolithic cultures. You have some kind of shamanistic, animistic interpretation of the universe. They had stories. They had stories. Um, and so there's three main groups that I see. There's three main types of kind of models for reality that I see. One is this kind of the stories or the myths, the creation myths and stuff that you see in religions and whatnot. You have kind of the more scientific modern approach, which is like the Big Bang and evolution and so forth. And then I think there, and this is kind of something that's up to debate for me, which is, are there people out there who kind of don't have a framework? I think to me, I would say that everyone does have a framework, but how conscious it is the question. Are they aware of it, or is it latent? Because if you just think about some of the people you know in your life, you can think about your parents or who some of these religious people are who have that's their model reality. Some people who have the evolutionary framework, who understand science, um, but there just really does seem to be a lot of people who just don't think about it at all, and don't even seem to have a belief. What's interesting is whenever someone has a religious framework for reality, whenever they exist within the Christian framework, for example, that really motivates their life. That becomes a guiding force to help them make decisions and to help them interact with reality. They pray, they consult God, they look for signs. They pray for other people. They listen to their dreams. Like, they think about the afterlife. Like, this is a framework for reality and perhaps what's beyond reality, and it's very pervasive in their lives. And then for those who are maybe what I consider more of myself, which is more of a kind of rooted in scientific rationalism or materialism, thinking about evolution, thinking about the Big Bang, thinking about the science, the evidence, the mathematics, the physics, and then for some of those things that are transcendent, we start to develop a spiritual language to deal with these kind of things, and we still employ symbols and we still employ stories. So and that's kind of where, for me, that's kind of where the occult type stuff comes in, as I basically seek to model the things that we can't necessarily measure, so that it wouldn't be considered scientific. Thinking about the afterlife or pre-creation, or what's the purpose for it all, or what are the mechanisms behind the scene, basically the guiding force, the thing that goes beyond science. So this is kind of my model, and I grew up in a Christian model, and I've seen that, but I just feel like I've seen what really interests me is really the question: is these other people? Are there people who exist outside of these models? And again, for people in these first two models, in either the Christian or the scientific spiritual model, uh, it does affect their life pretty heavily. They think in terms of that. They think, I know for me, evolution is a framework. It's a pattern. It's very important. In the same way that Christians interpret everything in terms of the Bible and God, it's the same with like evolution and science. Everything can be seen in terms of this like rational framework. But again, I just had this feeling that there are a lot of people out there who do not have a framework, and I just wonder, like, do they have a framework and they're not aware of it? Is it? I know for a lot of people, they kind of have some kind of latent spirituality, latent, religious kind of stuff going on, but it just doesn't really affect them. And honestly, I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem for people not having a model. I almost I mean, yes, you can have detrimental and bad models of reality, like Christianity and other religious models can be bad sometimes. But also, I think not having a model altogether just makes you kind of a to me, it just seems like you're on autopilot. It just makes me seem like you're just not you're not thinking about anything. You must just people who don't have some kind of larger model of reality, at least not consciously, they must. I feel like it's required. I feel like they must have some kind of latent model, and just the fact that they're not conscious of it means that they don't have control over it. They don't have a good understanding of it, and so they're being guided by these forces that are that they don't understand. And I think that's dangerous to themselves and to others. I try to I try to wrap my head around people who I see, and yeah, I think if we consult like Maslow's hierarchy, for example, I think that that's kind of I'm gonna pull up a picture of that so it can be seen better. Let me grab this real quick. Let's see. Hold on. Maslow's in here somewhere. Shit. Thought I had it in here. God damn it, Bobby. Tell you what. Anyway, you can look up Maslow's hierarchy. Basically, Maslow's hierarchy of needs expresses the layers of human needs. At the bottom, you've got the basic needs, like we need food, we need shelter, we need air, we need water. These are the things that are required to survive. Above that, we want a kind of a layer of security. We want like financial wealth. We want safety, security, resources. And then beyond that, we want like we want like relationships, and we want social community kind of stuff. And then beyond, it just goes from there. We want more and more kind of like artistic expression and understanding. So these are the layers of kind of experience. These are the things that humans need, and I come back to it all the time. So the reason I bring it up is because I think people who don't have these underlying frameworks, I think that they must just be like stuck in the bottom layers. They must just be like stuck on that kind of becomes their framework. And that's something I kind of want to segue into is that I led off by talking about these kind of like models of reality, frameworks for reality. Like evolution explains and describes a process that carries out on a large scale, and so does something like Christianity. But a component of these larger models of reality is a model of consciousness, is a model of the individual. And so it probably is worth bringing some of these up. I do want to kind of go into this. So let me just go ahead and actually. Should have had these ready. So we got Maslow. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and pull up. There we go. Alright, let's drag it. Alright, so we got Maslow's here. Alright, so we got Maslow's hierarchy. This is a more modern, scientifically accepted model of consciousness, or of kind of human needs. Essentially, Maslow's hierarchy of human needs is what it's called. There are some others out there, such as the chakras or the Kabbalah, or Timothy Leary's, but this is the most scientifically accepted model. And the point being that within these frameworks, like within the Christian framework or within the evolutionary framework, you can kind of derive what is the framework of the human, of the human consciousness, and that's kind of what this expresses. This expresses the layers of needs. And I think my point being that I think that people who don't operate within a religious or an explicit religious or an evolutionary scientific framework, I think that they must operate within. They must have some kind of latent framework that does build upon the same elements. And again, I just think that I think it's problematic to not be as conscious of it. I think that it's beneficial to find the symbols and the words that help to express your framework for your own understanding, and also for the collective understanding, in order to come together with others. So this is that's part of why I wanted to make this video, is I wanted to kind of introduce some of these frameworks, and especially really introduced my framework, and because I think it's been very beneficial to me, and I spent a lot of time developing it, and I think I wanted to kind of share it and get it out there with others, and kind of get some feedback on it, and maybe see if people could start to kind of implement it into their lives and see how it goes. But so essentially, my model is very much so like my larger model is is based in science. Like it's pretty straightforward. A lot of people understand these kind of concepts. Kind of the starting with the Big Bang, the condensation of gases, the creation of stars, the explosion of stars, the creation of heavier metals, the gravitational, the planets coming together, the atmosphere forms, and then from there one of the big leaps becomes abiogenesis, which is where essentially you have, and this is a lot of this is theoretical, of course, but and then again, conceptually it makes a lot of sense. But if you imagine the early conditions of Earth, for example, where you have like heavy gases, this kind of proto atmosphere, you've got rocks. Basically, you don't really have any vegetation or life yet. There's like no biology at all, and you've got water. So you basically that's what you got. You've got gases. You got like solid, heavy elements, rocks, metals, and stuff. That came from the explosion of stars. You've got gases of varying types of gases, and you've got water, and these all came about through the early conditions of the Big Bang and the subsequent explosion of stars and the condensation of gases and so forth. So anyway, you have these conditions in the early Earth, and so the theory of abiogenesis is essentially that there's like a little pool of water, and in the pool of water there are gases that are dissolved, like methane and such, and that essentially in this proto-Earth atmosphere there would have been like a water cycle. There would have been like storms and lightning, and then the lightning struck the water that had these gases dissolved. And that catalyzed the chemical reaction to create amino acids. And so if you're not familiar with biology, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, which are essentially the building blocks of biology and life. And they've been able to recreate this experiment in the laboratory. They've had water with these gases dissolved in it, which essentially mimics some of the conditions of early Earth. The lightning strikes, the amino acids are created. And of course, you have to stretch the imagination and think about how this, of course, molecules to amino acids to proteins to cells, to single cell organisms, like this kind of I haven't gotten to the details of it, but it makes enough sense for me to just kind of like, that's as far as I need to go. I mean, some people may be interested in going deeper, and I'd be interested to talk about that and hear it and go into the details about how that transformation happened. But that's kind of where that's my theory of essentially where we leapt from non-biological life to biological life, and then from there evolution takes its course. From there you have single-celled organisms that develop along these lines. You have the lightning, and you have the chemicals, and you have different variations and mutations of chemicals, and then some work and some don't. Some eventually form metabolic processes to where they are able to consume sunlight and get energy, and then they can essentially eventually some of them randomly mutate a mechanism to where they can duplicate themselves, and that's where you get asexual reproduction, and then yada yada yada. I always love play. If anybody's ever played that game Spore, it's a really cool kind of like walkthrough of evolution. Like you start out as like a single celled organism, and you're kind of interacting in this like little water, and you're trying to survive and eat other organisms, and you develop a little you develop a little tail, or you develop different things that help you move around and so forth, and you eventually evolve. So it's a really cool game. I definitely recommend checking that out. So this is all within the context of explaining my evolutionary model, or my scientific model of reality. Well, it's not mine, and okay, it is mine, but these concepts were of course developed by larger communities over time. So I guess I'll just go ahead and continue to walk through it, because I guess to me it seems pretty straightforward, but then again, I've been operating within this framework for a while, and so I think it's worth sharing for others, if nothing more than just to confirm or affirm that others have the same belief, or maybe some people may take some interesting ideas away from it. So moving forward, so you have like single-celled organisms. They develop asexual reproduction. They start to mutate in different ways. You have the early vegetation. You have early bacteria. You have early plants forming. You have early metabolic processes. They're consuming sunlight. Their photosynthetic processes are starting to begin. They're starting to convert sunlight into sugars, and then other organisms are consuming their waste. So like, yeah, and again, so like photosynthesis takes place. They take sun. They generate sugar. Other organisms eat, can eat them, and you start to form these early food chains. You start to have some like little fish and stuff. If you want to get more into this, I definitely recommend going to watch Cosmos, or just doing some research in general about evolutionary processes. It's very interesting to think about the early organisms and the diversity of biological life and the different kind of adaptations that happen. But I'll just follow the thread that led to humans, because that's obviously the most interesting to us. So basically you have like fish, you have like marine life, and eventually you have some kind of amphibious life that forms. You have vegetation that starts to form on the land, and of course all the while, this is all happening over millions of years. This is all, the climate is changing somewhere in this, at this point. I'm getting kind of caught. I gotta let me open the door. Yeah, so this is all carrying out over millions of years. So you have these amphibious forms that are starting to work their way on the land. Another good video to check out is that History of the World. It was the guy who did Bill Wirtz, I think. He did History of Japan. It was a funny video. He made a History of the World. It's actually a really good start to finish about like even about how we got here today. It's really cool. Definitely recommend checking that out. But just to keep walking forward. So you got amphibious forms. You eventually have land mammals. You have, of course, you have like some of the dinosaurs and whatnot. The thread that leads to us, I believe, is basically you have these kind of like marsupial type creatures, like these kind of like possum type rats that burrow. And I believe that was our ancestor that survived the apocalyptic event that wiped out the dinosaurs. And so you have this creature that eventually, after all that's over and after the climate's changing, this creature ends up kind of climbing trees, becoming more of like a squirrel type creature, which kind of ends up evolving into sort of like a smaller monkey, and so forth. And just to, before I go too far here, I wanted to cover I wanted to kind of go over the evolutionary process in general, for those who may not know. I mean, because whenever I'm sitting here saying like you have fish and amphibious life forms, like you're thinking, how did that even happen? So just a quick overview. Again, you can look these kind of things up if you want to. There's better videos that talk about the evolutionary process, but I just want to put it all in one place and condense it together. So just go over it real quickly. So the way the evolutionary process works is of course through asexual or sexual reproduction. You have DNA. DNA is what tells cells what to do, is what tells proteins what to do. That's what biology is the framework of. And DNA came about through the early evolution, again, just lightning striking water and chemicals, and enough times, and eventually some mechanisms start to work and they grow in complexity, and you have early nervous systems and early metabolic systems and early DNA, RNA type things start to form. So what happens? So basically, evolution is two main things: mutation and selection, right? So mutation is essentially the ways that like random things, random ways that the DNA can get changed. So whenever asexual reproduction or sexual reproduction happens, the DNA is duplicated. And in the case of sexual reproduction, it's actually split in half and then put back together. So basically, through those means, or also through other means such as like UV radiation. Like before the early Earth, before the atmosphere really developed, there would have been like harsh UV radiation, and that could have mutated a lot of the early kind of RNA, DNA. So basically, asexual sexual mutation, UV radiation, and other things can basically affect DNA, and they can cause it to mutate. They can cause things in the DNA to change, which 99 times out of 100, if not more, that's going to be something just random and just not helpful to the creature. Like the creature may develop, I don't know, blue hair or like claws or something, right? Like, or you can think about like smaller like bacteria developing sensitivity to light and stuff like that. those are sometimes it's random. Sometimes they could just develop something that just makes them die, and that's not good. But after over millions of years, you eventually have one of those mutations is something that's actually good. Like for these early single-celled organisms, that may have been the ability to convert sunlight into sugar, and that helped the organism to survive. And then later on, you have things like teeth and claws, or speed, or the ability to climb, or camouflage. These are things that just randomly happen. Like they just, the genetics, the DNA is randomly mutated. The creature has some kind of adaptation. Most times it may not do anything, or it may be detrimental to the organism, but eventually it does something that's beneficial. And again, over millions of years, that can transform. Over millions of years, if not billions, like that's what accounts for the diversity of life that we have today and the complexity of humans. It all came about through this process of mutation. And so that's the other process that I kind of just went over is selection. So you have all these random mutations, and based on your environmental factors, the most successful are selected. This is what Darwinism essentially is: survival of the fittest. The creatures that this creature develops a camouflage. Well, that helped them blend in, which means that they didn't get eaten, which means that they survived, which means that they had kids, which means that their kids were the same color and had the same camouflage, which again, this is kind of how the process works. Don't want to go too far into it. Look it up if you're interested. It's very important though. So anyway, evolution, marsupial creatures, human ancestors, squirrels in the trees, eventually become monkeys in the rainforest in Africa. Theoretically, I don't know. That's what I think. I don't know too much about it. Again, I'll be down to talk about it if anyone knows any more about it. But I think, from my understanding, at some point, several 100,000 years ago, our monkey ancestors were in the trees, and the climate dramatically shifted in Africa, and the trees became the tropical rainforest became savannas, and that means that there's the trees shrunk, and there was more flat landscape, and so the pressures of the environment forced the monkeys to adapt. It meant that the monkeys who actually learned how to get food, like how to essentially like hunt or to become bipedal, they were the ones that survived. That became the evolutionary pressure. And so you have monkeys who are becoming, they're no longer able to get fruit and stuff from the trees. They're really having to go on the landscape, and they're having to walk between trees and run, and they're having to escape predators. And all the while, they're learning to work together. They're learning to look out for one another. They're looking to use tools. They're throwing rocks, maybe, stuff like that. They're throwing rocks and sticks, and maybe at some point along there, they discover fire. As you can see in this picture over here, one other interesting theory is that their diet may have affected their consciousness. Things like mushrooms and psychedelics and whatnot may have stimulated intelligence, which may have helped with other problem solving, which may have helped with evolution and so forth. And so that's kind of what's happening. That's kind of where you get that's where you start to get like the Neanderthals and like the proto-humans, kind of like the next step of the chimpanzees. If you look back over here, that's where you start to get, if you look at this evolutionary scale, I don't think y'all can see my mouse right now, but you essentially get like some of the second or the third step there. And that just starts to happen. It starts to kind of continue to grow from there. You've got hunter-gatherers, you've got monkeys or whatever, these proto-humans. There's different words. Homo, it's all the Homo sapien, Homo erectus, Homo. There's a whole tree. There's a lot of evidence for it. There's a lot of fossils. Basically, I mean, from my perspective, that's all pretty solid. It's not really worth even debating. It's pretty obvious what happened. There may be some little changes here and there, but that's essentially where I'm at. Yeah, and so that's essentially how we get into the modern society. We eventually we're hunter-gatherers. We start to develop more language, more tools. We start to, eventually we domesticate animals. Eventually we domesticate plants. We have farming. We discover metals, smelting. Society starts to go more complex. You've got, you start to have writing and math and thinkers and military, and that's just that's where written history begins, and that brings us to the modern day.